Hello, I came across a post that caught my eye. Basically, someone called Dark Souls an RPG, and it was highly upvoted too, so many people seem to think the same. My first impression was surprise. Absolute bullshit. Dark Souls is a combat game, basically a game that follows the same formula as the old arcade games. Why would people think of Dark Souls as an RPG? There's no narrative that you take part in. Yes, there's lore in places like descriptions, and some people have put these together into their own theories. But other than existing within that world, what does a player do? The only way to interact with the world is by combat, just like in games like Doom, which I point out is clearly not considered an RPG. If you can only kill things, how are you playing an RPG? But after thinking about it, I think I get where the comment is coming from. The answer lies in the history of RPGs on computers. Role-playing games, or RPGs for short, were originally games that were played by a group of friends. Typically that happened around the table, which is why people use the term tabletop RPG when they want to talk about that specifically. You have a games master, or GM for short, who plans the scenarios and decides the outcomes of what the players decide to do. Because you have this human referee, who's usually able to come up with creative solutions, at least for the best GMs, players have no limits to their choices. They can come up with all sorts of zany and creative solutions to obstacles, and the GM can adjust things to keep the group on the right track. For that reason, tabletop games tend towards characters, role-playing their characters' speech and actions.
You gonna do anything special?
I'm gonna use my full action and my little legs to like run and run and run and run and run. And then I'm going to use my bomb in the stomach court, which is my bird poo, and I'm gonna get some of that and I'm gonna fling it at you and I'm gonna heal you up.
There are of course some groups that focus on combat and getting mounts of loot, but the best role-playing groups focus on the R and roleplay their characters. Computer RPGs, also known as CRPGs, first appeared on computers in the late 80s. They tended to draw on the mechanics and worlds created for the purposes of tabletop role-playing. The gold box D&D sets come to mind. There's exceptions like the Ultima and the Wizardry series, but there was a tendency to draw on existing media to base games on. Worlds were created and developed offline, and then imported into the computer media. Geralt and the Witcher series is a modern example of that. Back when the first CRPGs came out, computers weren't very capable. Games were 2D or simulated 3D at best, and PCs definitely couldn't keep up with the action offered in arcade games that used specialized processors. Text was also the only way stories could be told, so there were definite limitations on storytelling. So CRPGs naturally tended towards turn-based dungeon crawlers. Having the square walls of dungeons allowed PCs to only have to process a few walls nearby instead of an outdoor world, and making the game turn-based reduced the burden of processing in real time. As a bonus, crunching the dice rolls is easier on a computer, so party-based combat is actually much faster than on tabletop games. Party members were primarily there to fulfill a combat role, basically a bunch of stats and a walking weapon without any need for personality. All that gave CRPGs a niche they could flourish in. They weren't better looking than visual narrative games, and they couldn't give you faster paced action than shooters. What they could give you was your team and its various abilities, taking on epic dungeons and complex world building. Things have of course evolved since the early CRPGs. You now tend to play the part of the party leader, and choose party members from characters created by the developers. That allows NPCs in your party to have personalities of their own. They can be loyal or disloyal to you, depending on your actions during the game. They might have quests that you can fulfill for extra loyalty. They might like or dislike other party members and engage in banter with them or with you.
Wait, you're talking about an actual pike? Like a spear?
Obviously. What else would I be talking about?
I can't imagine.
The action might be real-time with pause, as opposed to just turn-based action. 3D technology has evolved to the point where CRPGs can also give you a true 3D experience, instead of just a few dungeon walls. But fundamentally they follow the same tenets. Look at a very recent CRPG like Pathfinder. The game is fundamentally about your party exploring a world with complex lore, and combat while dungeoneering. Dragon Age, KOTOR, even Mass Effect all have the same structure as the very early CRPGs. From the perspective of people who've only played CRPGs, then RPGs are combat-based games where you gather loot that in turn allows you to fight better. Classifications have also blurred as gaming has evolved and aren't as clear as they used to be. 3D isn't just the realm of shooters. RPGs like Elder Scrolls exist entirely in 3D worlds. Stats, perks and items can be found in shooters like Far Cry. So let's look at Dark Souls. You play as a single player. As you fight, enemies might drop resources and currency, souls in this case, that you might use to purchase or craft new gear. You spend currency to improve your stats. You explore massive dungeons and fight a variety of monsters, including bosses. If you just look at the stats, items and dungeoneering, then Dark Souls has a superficial resemblance to CRPGs. If you look at the action-based combat, hordes of normal enemies and a boss at the end, it has a resemblance to arcade beat-em-ups. My first reaction to someone saying Dark Souls is an RPG was to disagree, and pretty vehemently at that. But I'm thinking about it, I can see how people who have only played CRPGs might say that. I would still say that it's more accurate to say that Dark Souls is an arcade game that borrows elements from CRPGs, rather than saying that Dark Souls is an RPG. But I can see why that comment was made. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Feel free to leave a like, subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when new videos come out. See you soon.